We got the official Darth Maul trailer about a day or two ago, or a day or two ago from when this video comes out. And naturally, with a new trailer, comes new insight into what this show is going to be about. And that's exactly what this trailer did. We got some new scenes, and I think it looks pretty good. But before I get into the trailer itself, we got this prequel comic to the Maul show. And the first issue came out, and it gives some backstory and world building on Janix, where the show is going to be operating from. And it dives into the corruption there, and the issue ends with Maul on his way to Janix. So in the first issue, we don't get a ton of information or any new kind of maybe indication for the Maul show exactly. Just more backstory into what is on Janix and what type of planet it is, and then obviously we get Maul at the end, heading over to there. But anyways, the second issue I believe is coming out after the premiere of the Maul show, and I believe this 5 issue comic run is all a prequel to the Maul show, so the events in the comic are all meant to take place before the show. So we'll get a lot of backstory to what we're seeing in the show through the comic. But anyways, getting into the trailer itself really quick, it starts off with Maul being targeted by Brander Lawson, who basically discovers the corruption within the police force he's working for in the prequel comic. And in the trailer, he's targeting Maul. They know he's proficient with a laser sword, as they put it, so it's clear that they have some sort of footage or maybe eyewitness knowledge that he's likely killed people with the lightsaber. And they describe him as a syndicate leader. So at this point in time, I think it's fair to think Maul's associated with a ton of the criminal syndicates. And that was something he was doing in the Clone Wars. He was the leader of the Shadow Collective, which was an alliance of a bunch of different criminal syndicates. And obviously, this takes place about a year after the Clone Wars. And even though the Shadow Collective was destroyed during the Siege of Mandalore, obviously because of his past ties, I think these people likely assume he's still dealing with them because this isn't that long after the Clone Wars, with it being about a year after. And I think the prequel comic bridges that short gap between them. So when we see Maul kind of going back to the prequel comic, um, at the end stealing the smuggler's ship and killing him, that likely takes place within that year of time from when the Clone Wars ends until this show. But anyways, he's obviously making noise in the criminal underworld, because, if this officer, Brander Lawson, knows that he's proficient with a lightsaber, that's likely how he's killing people to kind of regain power, which is essentially what he wants. Then we see Maul fighting the Empire a little bit, or what seems like the Empire hunting him, and this was kind of shown in the first trailer. But he's got the Empire tracking him, and this police force on Janix is likely tracking him as well. So we get a little bit of Maul talking about the Empire, betraying him, and obviously he wants revenge for that. I've talked about this before, but he's upset and feels that he should be where Vader is, obviously, as Sidious' kind of right-hand man, and he's hinting at this in the dialogue that he says. But he's saying this consequence of betrayal is going to require a weapon, and he obviously knows he can't take on the Empire alone. And, he had this apprentice in the Clone Wars, Savage Opress, and once Sidious found that out, he killed him, killed Savage Opress. And you can kind of see what Maul's trying to do in the Clone Wars with, all the crime syndicates and with his apprentice, and he's obviously trying to build that up once again. And instead, this new apprentice is going to be this young Jedi, another Order 66 survivor, and he's going to kind of sell her on the fact that the Empire is their common enemy and that she should join forces with him to take down the Empire. And in the trailer, this Jedi and what looks like her friend are kind of, they don't know if they should join forces with Maul. They recognize the Empire as the common enemy, but being allies with Maul doesn't seem like a good idea to them. And I think it'll be interesting along with some other things. But one thing I think is interesting is seeing what the dynamic is between her and Maul. Like, is she going to get corrupted by him? Is she going to lean into the dark side and accept Maul as this kind of master of sorts, or is she going to push back? And if she pushes back and doesn't want to lean into the dark side, what's Maul going to do? Is he going to let her do that, or is he going to threaten her or try to kill her? Like, how is that going to work? I think that could be something interesting to see as the show goes on. Another thing, obviously you can piece together from the trailer that Maul, and maybe I don't know when in the season Maul comes in contact with the Jedi Padawan, or at what point does she officially join him, assuming she does. Will that be early in the season? I'm guessing it will be, and then we'll get kind of, because there's a lot of action in this trailer, a lot of stuff happening on this planet. Um, I'm assuming we see Maul create a lot of chaos on this planet, and with and without this apprentice, and that kind of signals the Empire to come and investigate because we see the Inquisitors. So something signals the Empire. We get Brandon Lawson saying the Empire is going to want answers and they're going to lock the city down. And another thing with this trailer, and we kind of get this like horror aspect to it, which I think is kind of interesting. Maul's like this entity kind of going around the shadows and killing people and definitely catching people by surprise when that happens. So you get this kind of horror thing going on there, which I think is cool. So another thing that I think is interesting, and this I think is probably the most interesting aspect of the show, is that obviously his intention is to take down the Empire, but how far does he get in doing that? Because obviously he doesn't take down the Empire. He dies in Rebels, and obviously the Empire is still standing while he's alive and after he dies. So, how far does he get? He gets the Inquisitors after him, and obviously Maul doesn't die in the show, because like I said, he dies in Rebels, and I also don't think any of the Inquisitors will be able to kill him. I think he's more skilled and powerful than any Inquisitor, which is interesting because does that mean Vader comes and has to deal with him? Like, how does this, there needs to be a bridge between these things because obviously once Sidious finds out about him, he's not going to just let him roam free and build up power through the criminal underworld. He's going to want to take him out, and if the Inquisitors aren't getting the job done, who's next in line to deal with him? It'd be Vader. Now, I don't know that we see Vader, but Maul and Vader fight in comics, and that's obviously Legends, but they do fight in comics, and it's under way different circumstances. Maul gets resurrected and fights Vader, and it takes place right before the events of A New Hope. But I think this line of thinking that Vader could show up is interesting because it would technically make sense for him to have to deal with Maul if the Inquisitors can't, and obviously they can't because he doesn't die. And not only do we see him in Rebels, but we see him in the Han Solo movie at the end, and he's the shadow leader of Crimson Dawn. So kind of getting from where we're at the end of Clone Wars until the Han Solo movie, I'm assuming this bridges that gap a little bit, and we get to see how he kind of rises to power. But I don't think I want Vader in the show necessarily because, if he does have to fight Maul, then it becomes a thing where you can't kill him because of that plot armor, because he doesn't die until Rebels, unless Vader kills him and then Maul gets resurrected again. But then we're doing something that's already happened and it kind of loses its significance a little bit and importance to the story, I guess, and it becomes a little redundant. And that's probably why I would say I wouldn't want Vader in the show. I don't know what kind of excuse they'll bring up as to why he doesn't show up, because it does make sense for him to show up, especially if the Inquisitors come and fight Maul. Like, why wouldn't Vader show up if they can't kill him? And then I think another thing that's interesting is that it's about 1 year that's passed between the Clone Wars and this show. But what's interesting about that is how quickly these Inquisitors get recruited and trained and get sent out on missions to hunt down and kill Jedi all within about a year, which I think is kind of fascinating and obviously very quick. And obviously, some of them were being groomed by Palpatine before Order 66, so some of that is longer than a year, but I think that aspect is interesting. Now, towards the end of the trailer, we get Maul and his apprentice fighting the Inquisitors, which likely means they obviously joined forces, and I think it's cool how they give this hint of Duel of the Fates there at the end with all the action. And I've said this before, but leaning into the John Williams Star Wars music, I think it's really important, and it's something they should definitely do. And again, the action looks good. There's obviously a lot of it in the trailer. I really hope that's the case for the show. I hope there's a ton of action, and especially for an animated show, I think it should lean into that heavily, and especially with a character like Maul, who is this really skilled warrior, essentially. And, you know, the anime stuff has been pretty good. Selfishly, I think I would want to see this in live action. I think if done right, it would be really cool to see this in that form. But the anime stuff has been good for the most part, so, I'm okay with it. And a slight concern with the trailer itself and how much action there is in it. There's a lot of action being thrown into these trailers, a lot of good action, and I hope there's stuff we haven't seen that when we watch the show. I hope they didn't throw all the best stuff from the show itself into the trailer, and I hope they're kind of saving some even better stuff. I don't want to be in a position where I'm watching it and I'm not wowed by any new stuff, and all the stuff I do like, I've already seen in these trailers. You can obviously throw a lot of good stuff in trailers without spoiling anything, but I think saving some of the the best moments is a good idea. But overall, I like the trailer. I'm looking forward to the show. It comes out in a few weeks, so it's coming up quick. We'll probably get little teasers building up to the show. I wouldn't think any more full trailers, but maybe something like a week before, maybe a few days before the show comes out, we'll get something. And then obviously we have this prequel comic coming out. I think the next one comes out after the premiere, and obviously these Maul episodes come out weekly. I think there's 10 episodes, 2 episodes a week. But I'm optimistic about the show. We'll see when the show comes out what it's like, obviously, but hopefully all these questions will be answered, and I'm hoping for the best with the show. And that's it.